Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait just a few more minutes so we can make sure that everyone has the opportunity to get in, and then we'll get started. Thanks so much for your patience. We're going to be just another minute or two. I had a couple people notify me that they were having some technical difficulties, so let's give it just a second or so. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Sorry about the delay. I just had a few people text me that they were having trouble getting in. So I wanted to make sure that everyone's connected and has the opportunity to join our meeting tonight. So with that, before we get started, I just want to remind everyone of some of like our Zoom etiquette, just so we can make sure that the meeting runs well right now. So please make sure that you keep your video and audio muted unless you have the floor and are speaking. That way we don't take up too much bandwidth and everybody hopefully has the ability to get on. Additionally, please make sure to keep the chat function limited to business only. So try to minimize personal stuff in there as much as possible so we can keep track of what's actually going on. When we get to motions being made, some of the more standard motions, I'll just say them and I'll require a so moved and a second in the chat. So no one has to unmute for those. Please make sure if you haven't already that you've changed your name. So it says senator, director, or even guest if you're visiting us tonight. That way, again, we can just keep track of who's who and what's going on easier. Additionally, a reminder that voting will be done via roll call for bills or through the raise hand feature for like smaller things or motions that require voting. Please remember that the raise hand feature is done from the participants window. You can go in and click raise hand there. So if you need any explanations, we can make sure to do that when we get to that point in the meeting. Additionally, I just like to personally request that you don't message me during the meeting over Zoom. I'm trying really hard to follow everything on the chat. And so if you're sending me personal stuff, I'm probably going to miss it first of all, but also might make me miss other important things in the order of what's going on. So if you have something, like shoot me an email because I have my computer up, or shoot me a text if you have my phone number as well. If you like need my immediate assistance on something. And then finally, kind of just as always with these new circumstances we find ourselves in, please make sure that you're patient and understanding. Obviously, technology is sometimes difficult to handle, and so if we're able to just kind of go with the flow on things, that typically makes things run better. So we appreciate your help there. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with our agenda. If you give me just a second to share the agenda for today. So we will go ahead and get started. So I now call this special Student Senate meeting of Kansas State University Student Governing Association to order. We don't do the Pledge of Allegiance over Zoom. So with that, we will move into first roll call with Maggie.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm so happy to be with all of you tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. Atchison.
Here.
Booz.
Here.
Brown Alex. Brown Madison.
Here.
Bruce. Brummett.
Here.
Bruna. Burke.
Here.
Carlson.
Here.
Carr. Clements.
Here.
Colburn.
Here.
Cox. Croslow.
Here.
De Santiago. Diaz de Leon.
Here by proxy.
Dilivo.
Here.
Fox.
Senator Fox is here.
Thank you. Frederick.
Here.
Gallardo. Garrett. Glasscock.
Here.
Grills.
Here.
Grolms. Guzman. Hamlin. Hurd.
Here
Hernandez.
and-
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Bruce is here by proxy as well.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I have the list of proxies. I am just going through the list of names. You don't have to say here by proxy, but thank you guys so much. Hernandez. Hutchings. Jambunathan. Johnson. Kidd.
Here.
Levi. Manners.
Here.
McKee. McVeigh. Muthukumar. Knoll. Norwood. Nunnink.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Panicatu.
Here.
Porter.
Here.
Richenberg.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Rossi. Schmidt. Shunjay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Shunjay.
Junjay is here.
Thank you. Snyder Blaine.
Here.
Snyder Ben.
Here.
Vance. Wagner. Wallace.
Here.
Ward.
Senator Ward is here.
Thank you. Watkins.
Here.
Wilcox.
Senator Wilcox is here.
Thank you. Willis.
Here.
And Weinholz. Sorry, is it Weinholz or Weinholz? Okay.
So a few for you, Maggie. Senator Norwood is here.
Perfect.
Harmon is here. And then Jambunathan is here. Some joined the waiting room during that time.
Perfect. Okay, anybody else that I missed or went over too fast? All right. That puts us at 34 senators present.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Maggie. Just a reminder to everyone here, 34 puts us really close on quorum for how many we're supposed to have. I figured it'd be a little bit smaller tonight because we are over the summer. But please, like if you need to like dip out, like shoot me a message, or if you're like having technology issues, shoot me a message. We'd really like appreciate you being here so we can make sure that we have a quorum and we have enough senators voting on everything we get to tonight. With that in mind, we'll now move into our first open period for the meeting tonight. Are there any open period speakers? Seeing none, we'll now move into approval of the minutes. Can I get a so moved in the chat to approve the minutes from last meeting? Or like, okay, Caucus Leader Phillips has moved to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Second from Chair Rodriguez. Are there any objections to approving the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes from last meeting will stand approved. Next, we'll move into announcements for the week. So our announcements this week, first of all, again, tonight's meeting is a special meeting. We don't typically meet after finals at the end of May. Student Senate will not be reconvening again until the second week of classes in the fall semester, which means our next meeting won't be until Thursday, September 3rd at 7 p.m. So please stay tuned to find out if we will actually be able to meet each other in the fall. I really have my fingers crossed on that we hopefully will be able to do that. Our second announcement for tonight is that Academic Affairs Director Regan Stonestreet has requested that the members of SGA please take out the time to complete the following survey that's from Faculty Senate's Academic Instruction Committee about fall classes and the semester in general with COVID. It's a pretty short survey, won't take that long, so please fill it out either during this meeting tonight. I'd recommend doing that even right now. It's pretty short and it'll go pretty quickly if you just want to pull that up on your agenda. But that'll really help kind of create like policies and let Faculty Senate really know where students are at and what this past semester was really like, moving digitally online and everything like that. So we'd really appreciate if you could take the time to complete that survey. Next up, the Riley County Elections Supervisor emailed us. She's looking for college students to apply for different jobs, including the positions of temporary elections worker or an election day poll worker. You can apply for those positions at the following links, and you can reach out to Susan Bowler, who's the county election supervisor, if you have any questions about those positions. Another announcement, starting in early August, I'll be reaching out to every single student senator and scheduling a one-on-one meeting with you to discuss SGA for the year and really just taking the time to get to know you better. So this will be a great opportunity for you to like brainstorm new ideas or familiarize yourself with anything that you don't quite know yet about student government. Proxies for this evening, please remember that like if you're ever going to be absent from a student senate meeting, to fill out the proxy form, even if your absence, if you're not sure, it'll count as like excused or not. So our proxies tonight are Brummett for Diaz de Leon, Grills for Grolms, Hurd for Bruce, and Richenberg for McKee. Number 6, the SGA members of the week this week is every member of student government who assisted and helped craft the new proposed privilege fee budget. So myself, Chair Brown, and President Whitmer helped craft that initial first draft, but Speaker Pro Tem Billman, Treasurer Hines, Chair Jonak, Chief of Staff Chumlin, all prepared impact statements that were each like a page long or more for us to review. Special shout out to Treasurer Hines, who had to not only create the entire impact statement for student government, but also had to create an impact statement for part of the fine arts fee and everything under the student activity fee. He had more work than anyone else in this process, so give him a big thanks if you see him. And then finally, we'd like to thank the Privilege Fee Committee members and all guests who attended their multiple hour-long meetings last week to have a really thorough and thoughtful discussion about the budget of Privilege Fee entities. This is a brand new process that we're doing this year, but it has run very smoothly and efficiently thanks to everyone's hard work that's been involved. So pat on the back to everyone who had any part in that process this week. Next, for our upcoming events, there are none next week. No meetings. Enjoy your summer after tonight. You'll have like a little time to be free of SGA until we get back to school in the fall. And then finally, our quote of the week this week is, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what this storm is all about," by Haruki Murakami. With that, we'll move on to the next thing on our agenda. We have no commendations this week, but we do have a new approval of an appointment. We're approving a new student senator to join us. So with that, I will now seek a motion to consider Resolution 12. If I can get a so moved in the chat. Moved by Caucus Leader Carlson, seconded by Caucus Leader Phillips. So with that, will the author of Resolution 12 please come forward?
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. This is Resolution 2021-12, approval of new student senator by Andrew Bruce. Whereas Aaron Middall resigned from the position of student senator for the College of Arts and Sciences, and whereas Durga Jambuth, I'm bad with names, sorry about this, Athan has the next highest vote total of eligible and willing candidates in the 2020 SGA general election for College of Arts and Sciences student senator. Be it resolved that Section 1, the following individual be approved as a student senator for the College of Arts and Sciences, Durga Jambuthanam.
With that, are there any questions or corrections for the author of this legislation? Seeing none, I will now seek a motion to unanimously approve Resolution 12. Can I get a so moved in the chat on that? moved by Senator Norwood and seconded by a number of people. Senator Croslow was there first. Are there any objections to approving Resolution 12? Seeing none, Resolution 12 will be approved. Durga, if you want to unmute your screen and your sound, we will have you take the oath of office and get sworn in.
Hello.
If you want to raise your right hand, and at the end, you'll just say, I do. So, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of Student Senator and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Kansas State University Student Governing Association.
I do.
Awesome. Congratulations, and welcome to Student Senate. We're so glad to have you join, even in like May.
Thank you so much.
With that, we've now finished all of our approvals for the night. So we will move into committee reports. Are there any committee chairs who would like to give a report? Seeing none, we will now move into directors' reports. President Whitmer and I have a joint report to give in a bit about the privilege fee process, but are there any other directors who'd like to make a report before then? Speaker Pro Tempore Billman, you have the floor.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, this is mainly just for caucus leaders. I sent out an email about a week ago with a Google form attached to it, just asking you to have a combo with your members of your caucus about whatever you want to do for your outreach week. If you would please fill out that Google form and respond to my email as soon as possible, I would really appreciate it. That way, you know, just all of your caucus members can be on board with that and free up their schedules. I said in that email, I'm treating this as if we're going back to campus. So just act like that, I guess. And we'll take measures when we find out, you know, more concretely what the plan is. And if you have any questions or didn't receive that email, if you're a caucus leader, please private message me and I will forward that to you. Or if you just want it forwarded so you don't have to dig through your inbox, let me know and I'll be happy to do that. Please reach out with any questions that you may have. Thanks, guys.
Are there any questions for Speaker Pro Tempore Billman? Seeing none, are there any further directors who would like to give a report? If not, give me just 1 second. I'm going to screen share a presentation that President Whitmer and I have prepared. Tel and I are going to give a presentation tonight about the privilege fee adjustment process, what this all has looked like, and kind of like what you can expect out of our meeting tonight, and some of the reasoning behind a lot of things that have happened right now. So with that, Tel, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, sure. Let's get started. Okay, so this is just a timeline I put together of our general process in particular. And so if you take it all the way back to where it began on March 12th, that's when we suspended our in-person courses and moved everything online due to the ongoing pandemic that was occurring. Shortly after, during my transition period in the month of April, while I was transitioning with outgoing President Penny, we met with officials from the budget office to go over a projected shortfall in both fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 for revenue that's collected through our privilege fee. So we wanted to get out ahead of that. And so after Nathan selected committee chairs, we went ahead and reached out to those entities to notify them that this is a situation that not only we're sort of expecting with declining enrollment, but also will most likely be exacerbated with the pandemic and the situation that we find ourselves in. So we received impact statements from each entity for a 2 to 3% cut to their allocation for fiscal year 21. And then later down the road, of course, last time we left off, we passed Senate Bill 2021-03, which moved funds from our debt reduction and emergency allocation account to cover that shortfall for fiscal year 20, and then allocated some funds from our bond surplus account to fill our mandated requirement of, I think it's 5% in that account. So later down the road, yeah, and I'll show on the next slide the process that both Speaker Bothwell, Chairman Brown, and I went through to create the budget that you can see in the agenda tonight, and that's where we're at today. But it is important to note that, again, we're really trying to be conscious and aware of getting out in front of sort of making sure that our privilege fee is sustainable in the future for other Wildcats to enjoy. So this is not something that was fun or something that we took lightly, but it is something that needed to be done, and we all have to be willing to make sacrifices in regards to the bill that we're presenting tonight. So Nick, you can go to the next slide. It's just in general what that process looks like, reviewing our impact statements that we got from each entity. So on May 6th, we received the impact statements from the directors outlining how they would, what adjustments would look like within their budgets and in their operations, looking at a 2 to 3% cut. We preliminarily reviewed those impact statements firsthand, where we established our guiding principles, which Nathan will talk more about in terms of just the criteria we were looking at and what we saw our role in creating the overall budget and allocation proposal. We had opportunities to reach out to those entities with clarification questions on their impact statements. And so this was not something that we were rushing through. It was something that we wanted to make sure we touched all our bases on as we move forward. And then we made initial recommendations on each entity. We spent hours for several nights in this about a week span wrestling with each entity and making those decisions between the three of us. And I put this on May 10th, joke in about Mother's Day, but like I said, we literally couldn't stop thinking about our privilege fee adjustments because, again, this is something that, we didn't take lightly and something that really needed to be done. And it's important to know, again, this is not an easy decision by any means, but something that, again, Madison, Nathan, and I wrestled with extensively throughout this process on each decision. So finally, we received more clarification from entities that we still weren't sure about and wanted some more clarification on in regards to impact statements and their operations and any questions that we had that came up throughout the process. And eventually we made a final recommendation that we presented to the Privilege Fee Committee last week. And they made a few adjustments of their own. So that's just a brief overview of the process that we went through in a timeline about what that process looked like. So Nathan will talk a little bit more about our decisions and kind of what, again, the criteria looked like for our role in the process and what we did to produce the overall proposal that you're reviewing tonight.
Yeah, so I'll continue with this. So as we were crafting this new budget proposal, it's not easy when you're looking at $16 million worth of budget to figure out what cuts you're gonna make and where. But as we were kind of evaluating how we would handle budget decreases, one recommendation we got from Dr. Lane, Vice President for Student Life, was to kind of create some principles that we could hold consistent and look at across the different entities. So obviously, one principle that was really with us was long-term sustainability of the privilege fee. If we keep pulling out of reserves, the fee won't last forever and we could face severe consequences, even like potential collapse of some entities and things, which we really don't want to do. But another thing we looked at was quality and quantity of the services that the privilege fee entities offer to students. So, there's some entities, for example, that host events for students, and maybe their impact was that they would host less events, but if they would host the same quality of events, just a few less of them throughout the year, that was something that we kind of felt comfortable adjusting due to the current climate that we're in. Another thing we really looked at was student-driven impact. So making sure that like the impact of a service was something that directly affected students. So it was like student employment opportunities or things like that, that like if an impact was going to be severe, that it would be severely felt by students. A thing really unique to the pandemic that we're in is we thought about the health and well-being of students. I think we weighed that a little bit more heavily than we would in times where we're not in like a global health crisis. And so we thought long and hard about the services that are really there to promote student health and well-being while they're on campus. And then finally, one of the last things we considered is that while these budget cuts are necessary, we don't want to give anyone a budget decrease that's so severe that it causes them to like entirely eliminate them as an entity or a vast majority of their services. So that was another thing that we kind of weighed when making our decisions. What this ultimately resulted in is a pretty standard 3% budget decrease across the board, with some notable exceptions, which I'm going to get into all of the reasons for those exceptions in the next few slides, and kind of explain why we left each one of them as is. If you have any questions about any entity that received just a standard like 3%, please feel free to ask that in a question later. Additionally, if you want to view any of the impact statements that these entities submitted, those are all uploaded on Org Central underneath the privilege fee folder under committee documents. So those are all accessible to you if you'd like to read those and kind of see the things that we looked at when making our decision. But so overall, for the next coming year, our initial budget proposal was a 1.25% budget cut. But after the privilege fee committee took a look at this legislation last week, they actually expanded it a bit and it grew to be a 1.34% budget cut. And we'll get into what the privilege fee committee did in just a second. So some of those exceptions that we had. So one of our initial decisions was on student health or LaFine. We cut them by 0.5%. That was a decision that we thought long and hard about. That one was really difficult in particular because LaFine is actually the biggest entity in the privilege fee. It's over $5 million. So roughly a third of the fee on its own is in the student health budget. We felt that like if we didn't cut student health at all, we really weren't making that big of an impact. And the thing about student health is that 0.5% of a cut there is almost $30,000, which doesn't even compare to like, other entities that aren't even that big altogether. So kind of with that in mind, we felt like this was a balance between like financial needs and student health needs. Additionally, the other thing that made us feel comfortable with that decision was that student health received a 1.5 increase year over year the last time they were reviewed. So even if we cut their budget by 0.5%, they'll still have a net increase of 1% in this coming year. Also, LaFine is being reviewed by us in the privilege fee committee in this coming year. So we again felt comfortable maybe not cutting them as drastically. And that kind of leads into the second point, which was counseling services. We ultimately settled on a 0% budget decrease for counseling services. The reason for that is about like 93% of their budget is in salaries. So they have, and the rest of their costs are pretty fixed. So if they were to take a budget cut, it would probably mean a personnel loss, and that would really exacerbate the wait time issues that exist at counseling services already. And we really didn't want to negatively affect mental health accessibility in a global pandemic. So we ultimately didn't cut the counseling budget. The fine arts fee is made up of a variety of like smaller entities underneath it that in total add up to like around $300,000. They received a 3.11% cut. And that's just because one of the entities underneath them, the College of Architecture, Planning and Design, actually voluntarily offered a 5% budget reduction, kind of understanding the difficult position that we were all in. So every other entity got a 3%, but they got a 5% in the fine arts fee. So that's why the fine arts fee is a little bit over 3%. The Union Repair and Replace Reserve account actually received a 20% budget cut. That's because this is money that goes into a reserve account that is used to like save up over time and then eventually be spent on like big renovation projects in the Union. I think the next one they want to do is like the ceilings in the ballroom, I think they said. That account has $25,000 in it. And we reached out to the union specifically and just asked if we could lower that to a 20,000 flat amount. And so that was one conversation that we had with the union director, and we ultimately settled on. The other one that kind of involves the union is the union has a food contract termination agreement. So in 2015, the union ended a contract early. I believe it was with Sodexo as the company, but we still have a fee that we have to pay out annually because we ended that contract early. So because of that, because it's an annual fee that we can't like make short payments on, we didn't reduce the food contract termination agreement at all. Kind of moving into some of the other exceptions to the decrease, the student activity fee received slightly less than 3%. The majority of entities underneath it received a 3%, but there was 2 that didn't. So the multicultural organizations line item, there's a few multicultural organizations such as the Asian American Student Union or HALO and BSU receive a small amount of funding each year. It totals up to $14,000 when you add all of them together. This past year, the Privilege Fee Committee actually decided to pull that money out of a reserve account. So students aren't charged for that money directly. Instead, that's using funds that we already have available. So we don't have a need to cut that because like there's no reason to cut money that students aren't like paying directly right now when we have that money already set aside. So we left them at 0 because there was no reason to cut that funding. And then for the academic competition teams item, we did ultimately settle on a 3% budget cut over all 3 years. However, if you look just a few weeks ago, back in early May or mid-April, we passed a piece of legislation about funding for academic competition teams for the coming year. And we already set aside $90,000 for this year. So if we give a budget cut to that, someone's going to like not get the money they were promised. So because of that, we're pulling from reserves the amount that we didn't cover already, if that makes sense. So a 3% cut there was $2,700, and we're pulling that $2,700 out of reserves for academic competition teams just for next year. So every like student group can get the money that they were already promised. Another account that we ultimately didn't end up cutting was the recreational maintenance reserve account. That's because this past spring, that was a $200,000 account that student government cut to only $100,000. So they received a massive cut of 50% this past spring. And we didn't feel like there was any need to reduce a cut even more. I know right now the rec is planning on like doing some maintenance projects specifically in regards to like health due to COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything. The sports club fee received a slightly less than 3% budget cut. And that's because kind of like the student activity fee, a portion of that money comes out of our reserve accounts already. So we cut 3% out of the amount that the sports club charges students. So the total amount is $67,000 for sports clubs, but $16,000 comes out of reserves. So we cut 3% of the remaining $51,000. That's how you get the 2.28% budget cut. Finally, the last one to talk about is Student Governing Association, SGA's own budget. We ultimately decided not to give SGA a cut. And I'm probably going to explain this one the longest since it is us. So it's probably really important that you all understand how our money is spent and why we settled on no cut for SGA. So we actually reviewed SGA this past term in student government. And when we did that, there's kind of like 2 really important things to keep in mind. So first of all, was that we kind of restructured the SGA budget. And so instead of a typical like increase or decrease, SGA cut our own like expendable budget by about 10%. But our budget did have audit payments that used to be made by the Center for Student Involvement got added into the SGA budget. So our budget kind of partially went up because the overall amount SGA is getting went up, but it went down in terms of how much money we're spending on ourselves, if that makes sense. So we already gave ourselves a pretty large cut comparatively due to just kind of like, you know, we know that we've been in hard financial times. So we were already like really straining ourselves in terms of like some of the things like conferences that we host and go to and things like that, that are travel funds. And so we were already like, we're trying to restrict that budget as much as possible. But another thing that we did this past year is we had what's called the Joint Committee on Officer Compensation, JCOC for short. And so SGA does have officers receive compensation. So for example, myself as speaker, I'll receive a scholarship for the work that I do. And there's a number of positions, committee chairs, the president, vice president, attorney general, et cetera, that receive compensation just due to like the number of hours that they work. They wouldn't be able to have a job any other way. Due to that, we have a special committee that sets those payments. So I can't come in and just decide that like my Senate operations chair this year is going to be paid double. Instead, we have one committee every 3 years that sets the compensation rates for student government. So those are mandated and we're legally required to make those payments. With that, one of the interesting kind of addendums in the JCOC like report is that the student body, that those like compensation amounts are paid at the in-state tuition rate is how they're paid, except for a single position, and that is the student body president. They can receive their compensation for like an out-of-state rate as well. And I think that would even apply to like an international student. So basically, like if you're the student body president, 100%, you'll receive a scholarship that's for 100% of your tuition. Those of you who know that this past year, we actually had an out-of-state student body president. So some of our reserves were depleted because we had to pay out that amount for this past year. And looking to next year, one of the things that was noted in the SGA impact statement was that right now, so before, after that 10% budget cut this spring, but not with any other budget cut that we're doing through this process, student government could not afford to pay an out-of-state scholarship this next year, even if we spent none of our money for this year. And that was one thing that weighed on us really heavily. That'd be like a legal agreement, an obligation that we would be breaking if we like were to not be able to pay that money. So we have a problem even before a budget cut. So with that knowledge in mind, we ultimately decided not to cut SGA's budget because we already knew we were in a tight financial circumstance even before an additional budget cut. So that's kind of why we settled on that 0% for SGA. So I'm going to keep going on with a few other changes that this bill has at the end of it. So one thing to remember is that this budget bill that we're passing, like other privilege fee contracts, will affect all entities for the remainder of their contracts. So there's some entities like Lafine that I mentioned earlier that's going to be reviewed this next year. So they're only going to feel the impact of this budget cut for this next year. Some entities that we reviewed this past year, though, like SGA or the Rec Center, for example, will feel this for the next 3 years until we review them again. And we've kind of talked about whether it'd be best just to cut for this next year or 3 years. But ultimately, although it's kind of unfortunate and unfair to some entities, we settled on the remainder of their contract just so we don't cause the privilege fee to spike in any given year after a bunch of cuts and then returning to a normal level. Looking at FY21 in particular, like I said earlier, this will be a 1.34% decrease to the overall privilege fee. So probably one of the largest decreases in recent memory. And this will actually save students about $217,000 in a given year, which is, again, like one of the largest cuts ever. Due to these cuts, the privilege fee has historically been 16 point however million. This past year, it was like 16.2 million. Due to the budget cuts we made, it's actually been moved down now to 15.9 million. So the privilege fee has crossed the threshold down below 16 million. One thing I want to reiterate that Tel mentioned earlier, though, is that this does not fix our budget problems at all. Like COVID-19, if our enrollment tanks for this coming year, like we still might be in a really tricky financial situation for the coming year. I know that revenue is going to be lost at some entities like the union or the rec, and this does not in any way solve our budget problems. So please don't have that impression. What this is going to do is mitigate them. So hopefully at this time next year, instead of being short or in the hole $500,000, we'll only be short $300,000 because we already cut $200,000 out. And again, so I know that that's not ideal, but due to how many unknowns we have right now, we really don't have any way to know exactly how much we need to do. Instead, we just tried to mitigate the problem as much as possible and tried to make cuts that would help us in the long run, but ultimately, kind of like I mentioned earlier, wouldn't really harm students. So we try to like manage those two things as best as we possibly could. Looking ahead, if you look on Bill 5 on the agenda, you'll notice, like I said earlier, that this does impact fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. And that's because the totals for that year, if you're looking down at the bottom, they'll seem a lot smaller, and you'll notice that they do not include, that the totals for that year do not include, it doesn't add up remotely close to 16 million. It's like 2 million, I think, in 23 and 5 million in 22. And that's because there's a number of entities that haven't received contracts yet for those years. So we don't know how much they're going to be. Two other changes that this bill does at the end. This process that we've been doing where we've been reviewing everyone because we're suspecting insufficient collections in the fall, we started adding that clause that allows us to do that into all the contracts this past year. This bill will actually add it into every contract. So in the coming years, all contracts will automatically have that clause added to them. And kind of like I elaborated earlier about the academic competition teams, we clarify that some money for academic competition teams will be pulled out of reserve accounts. So that's a lot of substantial changes. This is an incredibly large bill. It's 10 pages and it's very dense and probably one of the most complex bills like SGA has ever had in my time in it. So that's really why we felt the need to explain it to you. So all these changes I've discussed so far were what Tel, Madison, and myself initially proposed to the Privilege Fee Committee. But the Privilege Fee Committee made some amendments in committee last week while they were discussing it that I'd like to kind of share with you. So they kind of made two major amendments to the bill. And the first one was they actually further decreased the Student Health Center. So instead of just half a percentage cut, they moved to a 0.75% cut to Lafine's budget. This was done because a lot of members on the committee really felt that like we weren't going far enough in terms of budget cuts, and that extra 0.25% adds up to about $15,000. So again, like it's not a huge percentage-wise cut to the student health budget, but it goes a longer ways than some of the other things that we've been doing. So they really felt like that'd be necessary. Some of the reasons they made that decision included the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, Lafine will be reviewed next year. Even if they receive a 0.75% budget cut, Student Health Center will receive an overall net increase next year of 0.75% compared to what they got this year. And additionally, the biggest impact that Lafine mentioned they'd have would be a reduction in hours. And they projected that would be something around like $70,000 that it would save them. The total budget cut ends up being, I believe, around $40,000 or somewhere in that range. So not the full extent of $70,000. And so the idea is even if some hours needed to be cut, the Privilege Fee Committee hoped that the Saturday hours at Lafine would still be open and available and accessible to students who couldn't meet during the traditional weekday due to like work or class commitments. The other big amendment that the Privilege Fee Committee made was that they rounded every allocation down to the nearest dollar. So, we just did the straight percentages and it ended up, someone got 26 cents or 37 cents or however much. We rounded all those down to the nearest dollar. This was just to help with the rounding errors and assist the budget office. It's a lot easier to project the fee if it's a flat number than if it's got some weird percentages on the end. So that's just one small change that the committee made. I think it only ultimately saved like $3 in the long run, so not a lot, but found some money somewhere. And another thing to note is that the percent changes that you see reflected on here were before everything was rounded down. The rounding down is so minuscule for some that we didn't want to go back and recalculate everything with all of that when the numbers would probably come out the same. And then so kind of to finalize, last Thursday, the Privilege Fee unanimously approved the bill as it stands currently. So they approved that committee approved this bill by a vote of 9-0 to 0. And I can tell you after attending both those meetings they had last week, they did thoroughly discuss a significant number of entities and things on it in their committee meeting. I think they all did a fantastic job. So that kind of finally takes us to tonight. So Bill 2021-05 is on our agenda for later this evening, and that's the adjustments to the Privilege Fee budget for this coming year. Typically, bills in Student Senate take 2 weeks. So they're introduced and read 1 week. Then once they're read, they're sent to a committee. And after they're sent to a committee, they come back to Senate to be voted on. To kind of ignore that process, it's called special ordering. So we do it all in one night. Our deadline for all of this is actually tomorrow. The budget office has to submit things to KBOR. So if we want to have recommendations, we have to pass this tonight. So because of that, someone will have to make the motion to special order on this later, and that motion will have to be approved. That motion requires a 2/3 vote to pass, and it is a debatable motion. Finally, another thing, if you all saw my email earlier this week, is that this bill is super large and has a lot of moving parts, and I can totally understand if someone is dissatisfied if they think one cut doesn't go far enough on one entity, or vice versa, if they think one entity was cut too much. Kind of with all of that, I would tell you all that I really am strongly encouraging amendments this week. So instead of just voting no because you don't like one specific part, I'd really encourage you to try to pursue making a successful amendment on this legislation. So I sent out that amendment making template with the first draft and final draft of the agenda this week. If you want to make an amendment, you just have to fill out that template form and email it to me. I will only accept amendments in writing because if we're going to vote on them, I want them to be projected and screen shared so that way everybody has the ability to see what the amendment is and know very clearly what they're voting on. To make your amendment, once we start having debate on the overall budget bill, you'll just need to say, I move to amend the legislation. And if you email me an amendment, I'll pull it up and we can do that. And so just kind of like I said, what passes tonight will be the final version of the privilege fee budget for the coming year. So that ends our presentation right now. That was a significant amount of information. We went for like over 20 minutes on that. But I think it's really important that you all are informed and are aware of what this bill is and what we're voting on tonight. So with that in mind, I'd like to open up the floor for questions right now. We typically have a time limit on questions, but I'm honestly going to kind of ignore that because I think it's really important that you all get the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. So with that, I will open up the floor for questions right now on anything kind of privilege fee related for Tell and myself and even Madison to answer. So are there any questions right now? Senator Levi, I saw you raised your hand. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
Awesome, go for it.
I wanted to apologize for being tardy. I took a nap that ended up being like a 3-hour nap. But I was looking through the percentages for all the privilege fee entities, and I just was kind of curious as to why all of the things about the union we're seeing about an average cut compared to everything else in this list, just considering it's the union. We're not going to be using it as much, I assume.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to kind of elaborate on that, specifically in regards to the union. So the union, we did look at every contract individually. So the union has a couple different contracts with student government. But the one probably like most important to discuss would be the union operations one. So really specifically with that, the union's in this really interesting position where they lost a vast majority of revenue because campus was closed this spring. So looking into next year, they're expecting some like budget shortfalls and things, even if we didn't cut their budget because they just lost so much money that they usually would have made at this time. So that was one that we kind of heavily debated, but ultimately settled on kind of the standard 3% for a few different reasons. One of those is actually 2 years ago, the union received a 3% increase. So reducing the union back down would just put them at 2017 funding levels, 2017-18 funding levels, which we all felt comfortable with making that change. The other kind of portion of that is that some of, kind of like you just brought up, the union is probably going to be offering less services for this coming year. And so we felt comfortable giving them the 3%. But if the union were to open back up though, we don't want to like negatively impact them. One other thing is that this does impact the union for more than just next year. It's going to be a few years until their contracts are reviewed. And since these changes affect them for multiple years, we wanted to make sure that we're not giving anyone such a drastic cut for those multiple years. Madison, did you have anything to potentially add to that?
Yeah, the only thing that I would say is in the union's impact statement, they also did point out that due to COVID and some of these challenges, they might have an increased cost due to things such as cleaning supplies, any type of equipment or things that are going to be needed for temperature taking, etc. And so that additional expense was something that we also considered.
Okay. And I do have one other question. I should have mentioned that first. I know that the current plan is to reopen in the fall, but worst case scenario, if that does not happen, will we be able to reevaluate these budget proposals later, or are these set in stone no matter what changes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Really the question of the hour. So there's that's one thing we actually discussed last week in the privilege fee committee. I think that some members of the committee really expressed interest in having like multiple budgets. Like here's our like non-campus reopening budget and here's our campus opening budget. But unfortunately, we have to like submit all these proposals to the Kansas Board of Regents for approval. So this budget that we're presenting right now is the tentative reopening kind of budget. I mean, after kind of looking into it, if campus was to be like totally online again in the fall, there's some costs that we still would probably like have to pay. For example, like part of the privilege fee is like the bonds that on the union and the rec that we are mandated to pay, and we can't alter those payments at all. So there's a few things that we'd have to keep paying no matter what. We'd have a few options in the fall. If we wanted to reevaluate, we could have another special Senate meeting like this again, if we felt like that was most necessary. Another thing, and this is kind of drastic, and I hope it wouldn't come to this, is that, you know, while Student Senate does get the say on this, the president and the Kansas Board of Regents ultimately has to approve things. So they could kind of override us if they felt like there was, you know, again, drastic measures, campus can't be opened, we're furloughing like these entities for this year, et cetera. Those changes could be made without Student Senate as well. Madison, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, my only thing would be pointing out that all of our privilege fee distributions are actually done on July 1. And so that's the beginning of fiscal year 21. So on July 1, all of the amounts for fiscal year 21 that are in this budget will be transferred to our privilege fee entity accounts. And so looking at obviously July 1, we might not have all of the information for what is going forward in terms of campus and things like that, but that's just something to keep in mind of if we were looking to further alter the fiscal year 21 budget, we would be requesting that entities gave the privilege fee money back. And I'm not sure if that's something that we would be interested in doing, but there always is an opportunity with this insufficient funds clause to go forward for fiscal year 22, 23, and so on, and alter those budgets if necessary.
Okay. And this isn't a question, but just something I read about recently. Apparently some campuses are considering reopening in the fall, but only to their freshmen so that they have a less dense population on a day-to-day basis for their in-person classes. So that's just food for thought that I wanted to put out there. And thank you for indulging me.
Awesome, thank you so much, Senator Levi. Are there any further questions about this budget, privilege fee, campus in general, that we can answer right now? Okay, if not, we're going to continue on with the rest of our agenda for this meeting. You'll have the time to ask further questions about this bill and all the budgets involved in it when it comes to the floor later this evening. So thank you all so much for that presentation, for like listening to that presentation. We really appreciate your thoughtfulness and everything. So with that, I'll pull up our agenda and we will keep moving along. So next on our agenda, after director's reports, would be College Caucus time, but we don't have anything scheduled for that tonight. Next would be approval of minor allocations, but we don't have any of those. So we'll be moving into final action on Bill 4. If you'll remember, all the way back to April 30th, when we had our final meeting, we had one bill that was referred to the Privilege Fee Committee about the Privilege Fee Review and Audit Schedule, and they referred it back to us favorably 9-0. So with that, will the author of Bill 4 please come forward? Have any changes been made?
No.
If no changes have been made, you have first right to debate on this.
Great. So this is a piece of legislation that is going to be altering the privilege fee review and audit cycle. So we review privilege fee entities every 3 years, as well as they're audited every 3 years, but they're audited the year before their review cycle. So that way we have that audit information going into their review by the committee. So throughout the past few years, either due to an entity being pulled out of cycle, a contract that is less than 3 years, we have had, or entities being added into this review cycle, we have had it so where there was a disproportion in the amount of entities that were being reviewed each year. So for example, last year, the committee reviewed 8 entities, which is a huge amount. They did a great job of dealing with so many entities. But looking at the year before that, the committee reviewed 4 entities. And so this piece of legislation is essentially restructuring the review cycle to make sure that we have an even amount of entities that are being reviewed each year. I stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Chair Brown about her debate? Senator Brummett.
Is there any specifics to why you moved one group to a different year, or?
So Nathan, I might actually refer to you on this one.
Yeah, I can explain this. This is a piece of legislation we've been talking about since last fall, and it took reviewing every entity this year to like get to the point where we're structured like this. None of the entities were moved with like a specific reason. This actually was made to match like a lot of things that we're doing right now. So for example, Wildcat Watch used to be in year C, which we just were in, and we're going to be moving into year A next year. They were given a 1-year contract at the start of this year for kind of like various reasons that the committee wanted to see them again sooner. So because of that, they were permanently moved into year A. So the hope is that they'll be reviewed every 3 years from that point on. At that point. So like most of the contracts are like that. KSDB, for example, has had 2 years the past few times they've been reviewed. And then the ones that were added down here just hadn't been listed before. So Student Governing Association had been listed in year B, but was being reviewed in year C, for example. And Student Legal Services was newly added this past year. So all of these changes were made to reflect what we're actually doing. There wasn't like certain things like, oh, this entity needs to be in this year. Instead, this legislation is meant to match like our documents and our practices.
Okay, sweet. Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions for Chair Brown about this legislation? Seeing none, is there any debate in the negative on Bill 4? Oh, Senator Hurd, I'm sorry. I see that you have a question. Feel free to ask that.
Okay, sorry about that delayed. I was on mute just talking. Okay, I'm not sure if this question should be directed to Chair or if this would be related to your presentation from earlier. But my question is, I know you guys mentioned the bonds and payments that would be owed for the student union and how they can't come out of those certain bonds because they're contractual. My question is now, why wouldn't the university be responsible or able to cover those payments without relying on the students to pay this privilege fee to help supplement that payment?
Yeah, so you're asking a great question about bonds. Madison, do you mind if I take this?
Yeah.
So the bonds are actually things that a few years ago, construction projects for privilege fee entities can only be done by a binding vote of the student body. So like during election season, like when we elect like senators and like the student body president, a bond payment like that, which lasts like annually, is something that students, like the entire student body, not just student senate, had to vote to approve on. So kind of with that, I believe that one of the bonds for the union was approved in, the REC was approved in 2010, and I believe the union was approved in 2015. And so that's why like we as student senate don't have the ability to like override that or change that, is it's actually not like university administration that said that they wanted that. It's like the student body voted by a majority vote of all those voting to approve that. I know that Jen Owensby, who works in the budget office and is the advisor to the privilege fee committee, or I know she was on the call earlier. Jen, is there anything you have to add to that?
Sorry, I'm having problems with my mute button. No, I think you've done a great job explaining it. The one thing to understand about bonds is they are legally binding. We have to, we entered into bond covenants with bond shareholders, and they're kind of picky about this security of their investment. It's an actual open traded in the bond market. So there are some very strict legal covenants. So we have pretty much no wiggle room in terms of setting those budgets unless something happened where our payment schedule were to change. But that's usually due to a refunding, and I don't want to bore you with all that, but the budgets pretty much are non-negotiable.
Did that answer your question, Brenda?
Kind of. I have a follow-up if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I know she just said those are bonds are legally binding. Now, are those legally binding for the students or for just the university? That's where I'm a little confused. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, I'm not certain the exact extent of that. Jen, maybe you can elaborate more on that.
For the university, but I would, so within the bond covenants, we had to tell them specifically how we raise that revenue. So, and it's very specific. So every year I do what's called a bond disclosure, and I have to show them documented proof that we collected the amount of revenue from where we said we would that meets or exceeds what we said in the bond covenant. Does that help?
Yes, thank you guys.
Thanks for your questions, Brenda. They're a great area that I think we all need to learn a little bit more about at times. So are there any further questions about this piece of legislation? Seeing none, is there any debate in the negative on Bill 4? Is there any more debate in the positive at all on Bill 4? Is there any more debate at all? Seeing none, we will now proceed into a roll call vote on Bill 4. Speaker Pro Tempore Billman will do a roll call vote. Remember that you can just call out or type in the chat, whichever you prefer your vote. And remember, you can vote yes, no, you can abstain from voting, or you can pass if you want to see how everyone else votes, and it'll come back around to you again. So with that in mind, Maggie, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Speaker Bothwell. Atchison.
Yes.
Booz.
Yes.
Brown Alex. Brown Madison.
Yes.
Bruce.
Yes, by proxy.
Brummett.
Yep.
Bruna. Burke.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Carr. Clements.
Yes.
Colburn.
Yes.
Cox. Croslow.
Yes.
De Santiago. Diaz de Leon.
Yep.
Delaveau.
Yes.
Fox.
That was a yes from Senator Fox.
Thank you. Frederick. Gallardo. Garrett. Glasscock.
Yes.
Grills.
Yes.
Grolms.
Yes, by proxy.
Guzman. Hamlin. Harmon.
Yes.
Hurd.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Hutchings. Jambunathan.
Yes.
Johnson. Kidd.
Yes.
Levi.
Yes from Senator Levi.
Thank you. Manners.
Yes.
McKee.
Yes, by proxy.
McVeigh, Muthukumar, Knoll, Norwood,
Yes.
Nunink,
Yes.
Panicatu,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Porter, Ryman, Richenberg,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Rossi, Schmidt,
Yes.
Shunjay,
Yes.
thank you. Snyder Blaine,
Yes.
Snyder Ben,
Yes.
Vaughns, Wagner, Wallace,
Yes.
Ward,
Senator Ward is a yes.
thank you. Watkins,
Yes.
Wilcox,
Senator Wilcox is a yes.
Willis, and Windholtz. Okay, and then I also have that Senator Porter was a yes.
Correct.
Is there anyone else that I missed or that was muted or something?
Willis was a yes.
All right, thank you. Oops. All right, anybody else? All right, with that, Bill 4 passes 40 to 0 to 0.
Awesome. With Bill 4 done on the agenda, we'll now continue on with the rest of our agenda. So we'll now move into introduction of legislation. Is there a motion to consider Bill 5? Moved by Caucus Leader Kidd. Can I get a second on that? Seconded by Caucus Leader Phillips. So with that, will the author of Bill 5 come forward? Bill 5 is the long 10-page one. So I would entertain a motion to allow the author to summarize instead of read all. Caucus Leader Phillips moved that, and that was seconded by Caucus Leader Carlson. So with that, I believe President Whitmer was going to present on this.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for allowing me to summarize. So just a brief overview of the bill itself. The first section, and you can review it, the first section basically outlines, again, sort of our situation and circumstances that have led up to the passage of this legislation. And it also, the whereas clauses throughout the bill signify and establish each decision that we made and the basis on which each decision was made on. And then towards the end, there's a combination of each line item with its original allocation, and then its new allocation that we made throughout the bill. And then lastly, at the end of the document is the new privilege fee contract clause that we will be adding into each entity's contract that's specifically designed for a situation that we find ourselves in right now, in terms of pulling entities out of cycle to review them at the discretion of the privilege fee committee. But again, that's just a brief overview. Speaker Bothwell and Chair Brown did a bulk of the work in terms of really defining the decisions we made, and they did a lot of, again, great work defining those decisions. So I'd encourage you to read over it if you have not yet, and encourage you to pass this bill tonight.
With that, are there any questions for President Whitmer about this legislation at all? Seeing none, Chair Brown has moved for this bill to be special ordered. That would require a second right now, seconded by Caucus Leader Kidd. So it's been moved and seconded to special order Bill 5. So that means, like I explained earlier, that we would debate and vote on this entire bill tonight. So with that, Chair Brown, you have first right to debate on the motion to special order.
Hi, everybody. So it's really important that we special order this piece of legislation tonight because it is so time sensitive. One of the reasons for that is the KBOR meeting is coming up, and in this KBOR meeting, we need to present tuition as well as student fees. And so tomorrow at noon, the information for all of our budgets, all of our entities' budgets needs to be submitted, so that way they're able to calculate what percentage of the privilege fee will be going to each entity, how much of the privilege fee will be going towards each entity. And so that's really important, as well as on July 1st, which is the beginning of fiscal year 21, all of the entities will, or that will be starting fiscal year 21, which means entities will be receiving their money. And it's really important that they know as soon as possible what their allocation for fiscal year 21 is going to be, so that they are able to accurately prepare their budget and expect what amount they'll get in July. I now stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Chair Brown about her debate and the motion to special order? Seeing none, I'll now open up the floor for anyone who would like to debate in the negative on the motion to special order. So if you're debating in the negative right now, it's that you don't think that we should vote on this tonight. Seeing none, I will seek further debate in the positive on the motion to special order tonight. Seeing none, is there any more debate at all on Chair Brown's motion to special order? Seeing no more debate, we will now proceed into a hand vote on whether or not to special order. So this will require 2/3 to pass. At this time, if you would go into like your participants window and open that up, there should be a little raise hand button. If you are a voting member of Student Senate, so a student senator, and you would like to special order this legislation tonight, please raise your hand to indicate so right now. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. We'll count those votes, and then we'll count the votes against in just a second. So please raise your hand if you would like to special order Bill 5, which means to vote on it tonight. Okay, if you will give me just a second, Parliamentarian Arnold, if you will double check my count, if you will count and then message me what you get, I'm going to count right now and we're just going to verify that. So. Okay, perfect. We got the same amount of 29 yes votes. So now if you would like to lower your hand, or here I can lower all hands. If you are voting no on the motion to special order, please raise your hand now. If you're abstaining on the motion to special order, please raise your hand now. So that I count 3. So with that, the motion to special order will pass 29 to 0 to 3. So we will be special ordering, debating, and voting upon Bill 5 this evening. So with that, we'll now proceed into final action on Bill 5. Will one of the authors please come forward? You have first right to debate.
Perfect. So I really urge you all to vote in favor of this piece of legislation tonight. It has gone through multiple different steps in order to formulate it. Tell Nathan and I submitted a recommended budget after reviewing all the impact statements, and then was brought to the privilege fee committee. The committee did a very thorough job of discussing the areas that they maybe had questions or concerns about. They made some adjustments, such as decreasing Lafine by 0.75% and rounding down all of the numbers. There was a lot of thought put into this piece of legislation. To give you an idea, some of our guiding principles were looking at making sure that we were fair with all the different entities, which is one of the reasons why you see that almost every single entity receives a 3% decrease, as well as we wanted to make sure that this was a COVID-specific piece of legislation. So it really looks at decreasing entities because of the shortfalls we were facing due to COVID, not as much based off of entities' values and the services that they give to students, because we know that they give a lot of services and we are sad that we have to decrease them, but it's really something that is important for the long-term longevity of the privilege fee. To look at why this process was enacted, we currently had a shortfall of around $300,000 for fiscal year 20. 150 of that was because we were off on projecting enrollment. 150,000 was because we will not be collecting the summer privilege fee this year. So this is something that is a continuing and ongoing problem. We are expecting for enrollment to continue to decrease and for entities in K-State to continue to have challenges due to COVID in the following years. But with this piece of legislation, we decreased our budget by an additional $217,000. And so that means that that is $217,000 that we are not going to have to pull out of reserves at some point if enrollment does decrease and we do have an insufficient collection of funds. So I would truly urge you to vote yes on this piece of legislation. If you have any questions or would like further explanation, I now stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Chair Brown about her debate? Caucus Leader Phillips, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I guess this is just kind of a question in general about the bill. Nate, you said earlier that the overall dollar amount was now below 16 million, but on the legislation it says 16,057,000. I was just curious about the discrepancy.
Yeah, so I can take this one. So essentially, there are two different numbers that we have whenever we're discussing privilege fee. So one of them is going to be our allocation amount, and so that is going to be the 16,057,000. So that's going to be all of the money that we are dispersing July 1. So this includes money that is taken directly from the privilege fee, as well as money that we have in reserves. So there are multiple different entities that have reserve accounts. For example, as previous speaker mentioned earlier, we are withdrawing things such as $14,000 for multicultural organizations from the reserve account. Overall, I believe we have around $62,700 that is being drawn from the reserves account. So that 16,057,000 number refers to all of the money that we are allocating, including reserve money. So what we did push down was the amount of number that is going to be withdrawn from the new and incoming privilege fee. So that number is now going to be the 15,994. So that's the reason for the two different numbers. Whenever we are going to be discussing like the amount of money that we need to collect this next coming year, it will be that $15,994,000, because that is the amount of money that we need, the amount of revenue that we need to create, whereas we already have that $62,700 in our reserves account. So that's the differentiation between those two numbers and why we did push it down below 16 million, but the number also shows above 16 million because we're technically allocating over 16 million. Does that clarify?
Are there any further questions for Chair Brown about her debate or this bill? Seeing none, we'll continue debating on this. I'd like to remind everyone that even if you're a guest, you have the ability to speak. Someone just has to defer you speaking rights. So like any senator can do that. So if you'd like to speak at any point, please just indicate so in the chat and we would be happy to have you speak. So I will now be seeking any debate in the negative on this bill. So any debate in the negative regarding Bill 4. Or Bill 5, excuse me. Oh, and just to clarify, anyone can speak on any piece of legislation twice, but if you defer your speaking rights, that counts as one of those times. Thank you for the parliamentary procedure reminder. Seeing no debate in the negative, I will now seek any more debate in the positive. So is there any other debate in the positive on Bill 5 in this piece of legislation? Is there any further debate at all? Caucus Leader Phillips indicated he has debate in the positive. Caucus Leader Phillips, you have the floor.
Yeah, so hey guys, I just wanted to really debate in the positive for this bill, just because this is really such an important piece of legislation, just due to the sheer magnitude about either the dollar amount or just how many students this affects in general. So really, personally going through the privilege fee review with the privilege fee committee, we spent hours debating and discussing each of these individual entities. And a lot of these were, really tough decisions, trying to weigh both the student impact and the financial impact. So we spent a lot of time doing this, and I really think that the bill in its form right now is the best bill that we could come up with in the situation. However, again, I would also like to really encourage anyone, if you have any difference in opinion on any of these entities, or just anything at all that you'd like to see different about the bill, please submit an amendment, just because this is such an important process and this has to be done tonight. And these impacts for some will be felt for the next 3 years. So it's really important that we get this done the right way tonight. So yeah, like I said, I support this bill in its current state with all of the decisions that we've made on it. However, if you have any difference of opinion whatsoever, please, either ask questions or submit amendments. And I'd be more than happy, if anyone is a guest, to give you speaking rights to be able to debate on this. I'll submit an amendment for anyone as well. So But yeah, I'm personally supportive of this, and I'll open the floor for questions.
Yes, so Senator Shunjay, to answer your question, we can ask questions of anyone. If you have questions, you can direct them to the speaker right now. But if you have general questions, we'll be happy to take those as well. So did you have a specific question that you wanted to answer?
Yes, I do have a question.
Yeah, go for it. You have the floor.
So I see that on this budget, you cut 3% for the Graduate Student Council, whereas for the competition, for the academic competitions, you did not reduce any amount. So then my question is, E and F. My question is, how is E and F different, given that the Graduate Student Council is using these funds to also fund students or graduate students to go to academic competitions? How is it different from F?
Yeah, I can explain the initial reasoning for that decision. And so the really interesting thing about this legislation is that while it says 90,000 here, if you look at line F, there's this little subnote 5. So if you go down to number 5 right here, the academic competition teams in this year is receiving like a 3% cut in terms of what is coming out of the privilege fee. But the remainder is money that is coming out of the reserve for contingencies account, which is the reserve for the student activity fee. And the reason we made that decision is Student Senate. So like all of us on this call right now, you all voted just back in April to fund $90,000 worth of travel for academic competition teams for this year. So instead of cutting what we've already promised, like over 30 different student organizations, what we decided was that we would cut the amount that we directly charge students for that, but then pull the remainder out of reserves to make up that lost amount. So academic competition team still is receiving a 3% budget cut. It's just a little bit more complex. If I scroll down to the next fiscal year, you'll actually see that it's visible this time. Now their 3% cut. And if we scroll down to the last year, you can see it there as well. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Are there any further questions for Caucus Leader Phillips? Or again, any questions in general?
I do have a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So my other question is, there is a 3% budget cut for the International Student Center, whereas the multicultural student organization is not getting any budget cut. So how different are these organizations?
So it's a similar thing again in regards to amounts coming from reserves. If you look at multicultural organizations, they also have a little subnote here. And if you scroll down, this past year, the past privilege fee committee decided to fund the entirety of multicultural student organizations out of reserve money, some money that we already have. So they're getting like $14,000 is how much they're contractually obligated to get. But they didn't receive a budget cut because none of that money is coming out of the privilege fee, if that makes sense. Whereas the International Student Center, all of that funding is coming out of the privilege fee. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And if you may allow me, I have a follow-up question.
Absolutely.
So what do these multicultural organizations use this 14,000 for? Like, which organizations are included in these multicultural organizations?
Yes, let me see if I can get them all. I know HALO, BSU, the Asian American Student Union, and I believe it's the Native American Student Body, because we reviewed them this past year, so I'm going off memory here. But I believe it is those 4 organizations. And they each received $3,500 for their Heritage Month activities. So during their like individual Heritage Months, they don't need to like apply to like on-campus allocations committee that like SGA has. Instead, each year they annually receive money to like host events and things on campus. I think that was the correct 4.
Oh, okay. So does the African Students Union also fall under these multicultural organizations?
I do not believe so, no, in the status quo.
Nathan, I have the statutes pulled up right here if you don't mind, and I can say those again if you would like.
Yeah, sorry, can you tell me what it exactly is?
Yes, so it is the Asian American Student Union, the Black Student Union, Hispanic American Leadership Organization, also known as HALO, and the Native American Student Association. So they all receive $3,500 for their Heritage Months. And it can only be spent on Heritage Month activities.
So my question still is, doesn't the African Students Union qualify as a multicultural organization on campus, or is there a certain criteria which is used to select these multicultural organizations? My bad, I can speak now.
You know, I actually don't have a good answer for you on that. That's one thing that's been in the privilege fee for years. And I don't really know why it was started, nor do I know like what the decision-making process was to pick those entities. So I don't really have a good answer for you, Senator Shunjae, on that. I don't know what criteria was originally used. I think that like the way we could change that in the future would be like when the student activity fee and that line item is being specifically reviewed, we could like make a proposal to amend that or something like that. So if there was interest in that, that could be something that we look at in the future.
All right, sure, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Are there any, since the questions have kind of moved away from Caucus Leader Phillips's debate, is there any further debate? So I just had 2 positives. So now I'll go again. Is there any further debate in the negative on this piece of legislation? Is there any further debate in the positive on this piece of legislation? Is there any further debate or questions at all on it? Chair Booz has debate in the positive.
Yeah, everyone, hello. I'm debating in the positive just to, make sure that there isn't debate in the negative or any other issues or questions on this. This was the process of a lot of work from a lot of people. I attended the last 2 privilege fee meetings as well, and I actually proposed that student health get a 1% cut, which was later compromised between the bill, the amount in the, between the 0.5% cut that was originally in the bill and that amount to get the 0.75% cut. And so like, I've had some impact in this bill and I've had time to look it over, but what I'm afraid of is that a lot of people haven't taken the time to look it over yet. And so, I've had a lot of time to come to terms. I like everything in this bill pretty much, but I really encourage you to give this your full attention. My first intern meeting, for instance, was had a very long Senate meeting, which had a very long debate over special ordering a resolution to send to one of our Kansas senators in the United States Senate. And I've taken away from that you never special order things lightly. And, we had to special order this today to get it to the Board of Regents and everything, but still it shouldn't be done lightly. And I think we really need to give this our full attention. I've done that, and, we haven't seen any debate in the negative or any amendments yet. And so I'm worried that we're just going to pass this without looking at it. So please do look at it. So I'll take any questions anyone has.
Are there any questions for Chair Booz about his debate? Question from Caucus Leader Phillips.
Yeah, hey, Andrew. You mentioned that during the initial process, you were more on board with a 1% cut to student health. Could you just go over a little bit about why you felt that way?
Yeah, sure. So I had read over Student Health's impact statement and had some time to think of it. So we had the meeting on Monday for privilege fee, and then I took some more time to think about it, about what level of cuts I thought were appropriate. And in the end, like I thought that a 1% cut was appropriate for a couple reasons. One of which was they said in their impact statement that if they were cut, they would mostly just decrease hours to make up the difference. And decreasing from 57 to 45 hours a week would have saved them about $75,000. And so given that a 1% cut was about $56,000, I believe, maybe a little bit more than that, they wouldn't have to reduce it all the way to 45 hours. And then the other thing is just that student health is the single biggest thing in the privilege fee. And so I think we, could have done more. And I was glad to see that generally, the committee agreed with me, but they also felt like that student health needed to keep a little bit more hours open than I think I was willing to trade off. So I'm perfectly fine with that trade-off. And that, that's why I felt like we should, I'm perfectly fine with 75 or 0.75.
Are there any further questions for Chair Booz about his debate? Seeing none,
thanks.
We'll now move into, is there any debate in the negative at all? Is there any more debate in the positive? Caucus Leader Kidd, you have the floor.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So I'll keep this brief. I don't want to stall the meeting or anything. But something that I just want to share that, like, from my perspective with being a part of the privilege fee and being in this meeting, is that in the discussion that we had for hours and hours, I would say it was a very rich discussion. It was a very rich discussion to which we kind of really took the time to play out some different potential scenarios of what we could do with funding, and I just to share more about the details of it, the degree to which we had this discussion, we got so deep into the weeds that I eventually asked at one point, if we've met our goal with the task at hand for today. One thing I'd like to leave with everyone: Rome wasn't built in a day, and so with this scenario, one night of a meeting with us discussing this is not going to necessarily fix the whole problem, and that's just to really reiterate what Speaker Bothwell mentioned and what President Whitmer mentioned too. And so with that, what I'd also share is that the questions that we were asking, I would say to a certain degree, they were getting so specific that we were getting so specific with the questions that I at one point was thinking, I wonder if that could be better saved for when we review those privilege fee cycles. Only because I know that, with the task at hand and with our current scenario, it is important that we find the ways to save those funds. But with that, I also didn't think that this specific new process that we're going through should necessarily be used to I guess, engage in oversight of what some of these entities are doing with their funds. So again, I just wanted to describe more of the of the weeds of what we were doing. As they say, the devil's in the details, and so we definitely engaged in that long process when the privilege fee met. So with that, I will now stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Caucus Leader Kidd? Seeing none, I've now had 4 debate in the positive, so I'll be seeking my 4th debate in the negative right now. Is there any further debate in the positive? Is there any further debate at all? Seeing none, we will now move into a roll call vote on Bill 5. So just a reminder from earlier, you have 4 options when voting. You can go yes, no, abstain, or you can choose to pass and see what everyone else does. But with that, I will turn it over to Speaker Pro Tempore Billman, and she will do the roll call.
All right. Thank you, Speaker Bothwell. All right, Atchison.
Yay.
Booz?
Pass.
I'm sorry, was that a yes or a pass?
Pass. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, no, that's okay. Brown Alex? Brown Madison?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes, by proxy.
Brummett?
No.
Bruna? Burke?
Yes.
Carlson?
Yes.
Carr? Clements?
Yes.
Colburn?
Yes.
Cox? Crosslow?
Yes.
De Santiago? Diaz de Leon?
Yes.
Dilivo?
Yes.
Fox?
Senator Fox is a yes.
Thank you. Frederick? Gallardo? Garrett? Oh. I just got that Senator Frederick was a yes. Thank you. Glasscock?
Yes.
Grills?
Yes.
Grolms?
Yes, by proxy.
Guzman? Hamlin? Harmon? Hurd?
Yes.
Hernandez? Hutchings? Jambunathan?
Yes.
Johnson? Kidd?
Yes.
Levi? Senator Levi, yes, thank you. Manners?
Yes.
McKee?
Here by proxy. Or yes by proxy.
That's okay. McVeigh? Muthukumar?
Muthukumar is a yes.
Thank you. Knoll? Norwood?
I was wondering, can I abstain?
Yes, you can.
Yes, of course.
Abstain. Thank you.
Nanink?
Yes.
Pinikatu?
Yes.
Phillips?
Yes.
Porter?
Abstain.
Fryman? Richenberg?
Yes.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
Rossi? Schmidt?
Yes.
Shunjay?
Pass.
Snyder Blaine?
Yes.
Snyder Ben?
Yes.
Vance? Wagner? Wallace?
Yes.
Ward?
Senator Ward is a yes.
Thank you. Watkins?
Yes.
All right, Senator Wilcox is a yes. Willis?
Yes.
And Winholtz. Okay, let's go back to the passes. Chair Booz
Yes.
and Senator Shunjay.
Abstain.
Abstain. All right. Is there anybody that I missed or
Say things that can't be backed up. Sorry, Pro Tem, but I think you missed me. Harmon's a yes.
all right, thank you. Okay. Everybody else good? All right, with that, Bill 5 passes 37 to 1 to 3.
With that, Bill 5 has passed. So thank you all for your consideration and thoughtful votes and questions and everything like that on this bill tonight. We all really appreciate it. With that, we've exhausted all the legislation on our agenda. So we'll now move into second open period. Are there any speakers for second open period? Chair Colburn.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I guess first, I just want to commend everyone on the privilege fee and everyone who's here tonight. I, for one, forgot it was Thursday and my sister had to remind me, so congrats to being here. But just to kind of touch back on some stuff, we talked about, or I brought up a couple things in Senate Exec that I just wanted to also bring up here, the answers and questions I had. I really, you know, as difficult as it is to cut so many organizations that contribute so much to K-State by about 3% across the board, I do think that it was really important in this really difficult time to do that. So thank you to everyone who made those tough decisions. It's easy for someone to vote, but it's harder for someone to come up with those numbers. But I do think that moving forward, something that I'm interested in and that I initially had concerns about on this bill was the fact that SGA's internal operating budgets didn't receive any cuts. I do find it a little hypocritical when we cut other organizations and we don't cut ourselves. Going into Senate Exec, I had some questions and concerns about that and learned and realized that because of our Joint Officers for Compensation Committee, JCOC as it's usually referred, we're not allowed to change most of that operating budget on our own in a privilege fee bill like this one. So I just want to let everyone know moving forward, I'm personally interested in seeing how we can make ourselves a little bit more accountable in that process because, you know, moving forward, what does it look like to add statutes into our contracts, talking about when we cut everything else 3% across the board, does that mean that we have to call JCOC, things like that? As someone who will be receiving compensation next year, I'm totally interested in looking forward to that and recognize, you know, the hypocrisy of me voting for something to cut other organizations while still receiving a small bit of compensation from SGA and not receiving any cut in that scholarship. So I just wanted to bring attention to that. I hope that no one took that choice lightly. I know that privilege fee didn't. I know they talked a lot about it and there was a lot of concern with that, but I just think that's something that I'm interested in learning more about moving forward and making some changes to moving forward to see how we can build our own reserve account so that we can be in the same position to, if something like this ever happens again, we can cut our budget just like we're cutting everyone else's, adjust our budget just like everyone else. So that was a bit rambly, but I did think that it was important to note, just to put out there that, you know, we didn't cut ourselves. I recognize why, but moving forward, we should probably look at how we can change that in the future. Thanks.
Are there any questions for Chair Colburn? Seeing none, Chair Brown, I had you indicate next for speaking.
Yes, thank you guys for putting in work on this piece of legislation. I just wanted to say that going forward in privilege fee, we still have a lot of work to do, and I really implore you that if you had any questions, comments, or concerns about any particular entities, we will be reviewing a lot of entities this next year, such as Lafine, Counseling, the Collegian, and I know there are a lot of thoughts there, as well as we always have the opportunity to pull entities out of cycle. So if you have any thoughts about, oh, I think XXX should happen with the privilege fee, or concerns about budgets and allocations going forward, I really suggest you reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat, but we have a whole summer to plan and talk about things and look at potential things moving forward and to get jump started for the fall whenever the committee starts meeting up. So I just want to say thank you guys for the hard work you do, and if you have any questions, to definitely reach out.
Are there any questions for Chair Brown? Seeing none, Senator Porter asked, is there any information that can be provided on the reopening plan for next semester that's not already known. I don't have anything to add based off any conversations that I've had with administrators. I don't know if anyone else does and would be willing to defer an answer to that question. But I think I know that the Collegian did like a really good article like summarizing what's remaining in that reopening plan and what's been announced there so far. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to take a look at that. I think that's in K-State today as well. Is there anyone else who has anything to add to that question?
Nathan, I would just add, there is currently a group of faculty, primarily faculty, but there are some staff who are serving on a work group that are looking at the academic options for the fall semester. And they have been asked to submit their reports and their recommendations to President Myers sometime next week. So us administrators across campus are pretty much planning to hear something next week or the following to give us a better idea of what the fall semester will look like for K-State. And I'm sure there'll be a K-State today and a Collegian article that'll come out from that as well, but just a little additional info.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. Are there any further questions or anyone who would like to speak for second open period? Seeing none, the one little thing that I would add is I just want to say like, thank you to all of you. Like I've really appreciated like everyone's involvement in this process. Like I know like getting together like in May is probably not what many people were expecting. And from my perspective, like it's really weird for me that there's a lot of you I still have yet to meet in person. I like that's one of like the biggest things that I miss about Student Senate is I don't know if you've all heard this before, but people always said like the 5 minutes before a meeting and the 5 minutes after a meeting are like where you get the most work done because you just chat with people and get to see everyone. And like I have really missed that. And I don't know about all of you. So I just want to say like thank you to all of you for your dedication and service. Like it really does mean a lot. And I hope that you all take the summer as a time to unwind. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy. But like we really appreciate you taking the time to show up and like voice your thoughts, concerns, and questions and everything during this process over the past few weeks. Like all of you are very much appreciated, I can tell you. So thank you so much for everything that you all have done by like showing up tonight. With that, the last few things on our agenda, we don't have anything to reference for legislation. We have voted on all of it and it's all been taken care of. And so with that, we will move into our second roll call for the evening with Speaker Pro Tempore Billman.
Sorry about that. I was typing away on the minutes. Okay. For the last time until September, Atchison.
Here.
Brown Alex. Oh, I'm sorry, Booze.
I'm here.
All right, and then Brown Alex. Brown Madison.
Here, or yeah, here.
Bruce. Brummett.
Here.
Bruna. Burke.
Here.
Carlson.
Here.
Carr. Clements.
Here.
Colburn.
Here.
Cox. Crosslow.
Here.
De Santiago. Diaz de Leon.
Here.
Delaveau.
Here.
Fox.
Senator Fox is here.
Thank you. Frederick.
Senator Frederick is here.
Thank you. Gallardo. Garrett. Glasscock.
Here.
Thank you. Grills.
Here.
Groms,
Here by
Guzman,
proxy.
Hamlin, Harmon.
Senator Harmon is here.
Thank you. Hurd,
Here.
Hernandez,
Here.
Hutchings, Jambunathan,
Here.
Johnson, Kidd,
Here.
Levi,
Here.
Manners,
Here.
McKee, and then McVeigh, Muthukumar,
Here.
Knoll, Norwood,
Here.
Nunnink,
Here.
Phillips,
Here.
Panicatu. Thank you. Porter,
Here.
Richenberg,
Here.
Rodriguez,
Here.
Rossi, Schmidt, Shunjay.
Senator Shunjay is here.
Thank you. Snyder Blaine,
Here.
Snyder Ben,
Here.
Vaughn, Wagner, Wallace,
Here.
Ward.
Senator Ward is here.
Thank you. Watkins,
Here.
Wilcox.
Senator
Got
Wilson
it.
is here.
Thank you. Willis
Here.
and Windholtz. All right. Anybody that I missed? All right, with that, that is 37 senators present. Thank you all.
Awesome. With that, we've now finished our entire meeting agenda. So I will now seek a motion for us to adjourn until Thursday, September 3rd at 7 p.m., hopefully not over Zoom. Moved by Caucus Leader Kidd, seconded by Hurd. Are there any objections? Seeing none, thank you all so much for your time. Enjoy your summer.